everyone! Today I'm going to be doing a showcase of how I made my Libra from Fire Emblem Cosplay. At this point I've finished all of the sewing parts and I just want to show you everything I've been working on, so let's get started. So starting off we have Libra's mantle, which is what I call this outer cape piece, and this was quite the adventure to make. And you would think something that has no sleeves, that's supposed to be just like a front and a back and a collar, would be really easy. But for some reason, Libra's mantle is pleated, and it took me forever to figure out a method that I liked enough to use for the final version. What I eventually ended up doing was make a lining that was the ideal size of my mantle, and then for the outer layer, I extended the neckline to be way larger so that I could make darts to tighten it up to fit along the lining's neckline. I think that the method I used is sort of what happens accidentally when you cut pattern pieces to be the wrong size and one ends up being way larger, so you kind of have to like pinch and dart it accidentally to make the larger piece fit with the smaller piece, but I did it more intentionally to create the pleats along his neckline. Libra's actual design has quite a bit more pleats, but this was the best I could do without completely losing my mind. So once both layers are sewn together, I started working on Libra's not one but two collars. So his inner collar is attached as you would any other collar, and for the outer one I had to be a bit more creative, and it's probably one of the aspects I would change if I could do it again. So his outer collar is a bit longer and wider than the inner collar, and is completely finished so that the raw edges are not showing. And then I ended up hand sewing the lining of the outer collar to the mantle itself, and only going through the lining so that the stitches would not show through onto the outer side. There were a couple of stitches that sneaked through so that you can see them, so if I could redo it, I definitely would be a lot more careful and make this look as clean as possible, because right now it's a little funky. So the final steps for the mantle were the gold and gray trims. So around the smaller collar there is a handmade bias tape that's a half-inch double folded, and for this large gray stripe I had a lot of trouble for a while with it bunching up, and I realized it was because when I was trying to sew it I was pulling the pleats to like lay flat, and because of that this was always ending up being much shorter than intended. And so what I did to correct that was I ended up doing sort of like a stay stitch all around it to tack down all of the pleats so that they stay folded, and then I went ahead and put on this gray stripe, and the way it was sewn was sort of like flipped up, going on like that, and then it folds over so that this is like a nice hidden seam. So for the gold trim, it's also handmade bias tape that's I think 3/4 of an inch double folded as well, and it's kind of like folded up around the underside. I then figured out the placement of how I wanted to space out my arrowheads. My design deviates a little bit from the original in that Libra's gold pieces actually stop like right at the end of the first arrowhead, but because I was using this gold trim as a way to finish the bottom edges, I had to continue it to extend all the way to the center. So the way the arrowheads are made is that they are two pieces of satin with a layer of cotton batting in between, and I just satin stitched along the edges and then cut them out and then sealed the ends with some fray check. And when I did the original satin stitching, I only followed like the contours of the arrowhead, and then to attach them to the mantle itself I did stitching along this sort of ending rectangle piece so that they're only attached from there. And I think it was a good way to like kill two birds with one stone, so I didn't waste thread like satin stitching all of this and then having to satin stitch it again to attach it to the mantle, and I think it gives it a pretty nice clean look. I then put in a zipper, which gave me a little bit of trouble as well, given that it ended up being a little bit too short, so I had to adjust this gray bias tape to keep this from being like a completely raw edge right at the ends of the collars. It doesn't look as bad as it does right now once it's on, because I can kind of like finagle it and pull it around so that it's all hidden. So lastly I have Libra's cross brooches, and these are just pieces of craft foam covered in Libra, and then they have a pin backing as well as a bail attached on the bottom that has some silver chain going across the other one. And to make sure that these pin backings will not fall off, they are adhesive, but to, again, really secure them, I have a piece of fibber that like goes and drapes across the backing of the pin so that it's really, really secured. And I have the same thing for the ends of the bails. So that is all for the mantelpiece. Now I'm going to take this off and show you how I made his lower tunic. Okay, so making the tunic was probably the part where I took the most liberties in Libra's design, because I'm pretty sure Libra's supposed to have 2 robes, but I combined them into one. So the front is double layered with a lining and an outer piece, and then it's trimmed in, again, like handmade gray bias tape. Making this trim was also kind of funky, especially in like this bottom point. It really has like bunched up a lot because I was cutting it at like an angle, trying to make it be a perfect diamond, and then like when I folded it over, it just looked really odd. And it was a lot more bunched up, but then I did a top stitch along the edges, and it actually cleaned it up a lot, especially in like this midsection. The ends obviously are not finished, but you never see them because they have like the mantle over top, so I was like, why even bother like adding the rest of this gray trim up here? As you can see in Libra's design, the gray sections on his back wrap around to connect somewhere onto his belt. So to replicate that, I made the overall shape of the back piece. I can only describe it as looking like a manta ray with these 2 like long wing pieces that wrap around to connect in the front. And I have them with these pieces of ribbon so that I tie them around the waist, and then they're all completely covered by the belt. So like you can't even see that it has this really weird closure piece here. If I were to do this again, I definitely would make the wings even larger because as you can kind of tell on the mannequin, they hang quite close to my chest when I have them tied up. And Libras are quite spacious and kind of like bubble out over top of the belt, so I definitely would make these a lot baggy. Obviously the white and the gray are sewn together at the shoulder seams, and when I first put it on, I actually had made the neck hole a little bit too small, so I had to trim it down. And then once I did that, I did a bias tape binding, which I will link the video down below that I used as a tutorial. And I really like how it came out. It looks really professional, and it's a lot easier than having to make like a facing pattern and try and deal with all that. So I am glad that it turned out to be pretty simple. So for this white rectangular pattern along the back, I designed the pattern on like a piece of paper and then just made like a bajillion strips of this white trim, as well as cutting some fusible webbing that was the same size. When I cut these strips, I cut the fusible webbing like laying on top of it so that the 2 pieces would match up exactly. So all of my trims like this I do in sort of like an applique style, where I put the fusible webbing down first to kind of just tack it to the fabric, and then I set and stitch around the edges. The way I do it is I take a piece of damp muslin and I lay it over top of the trim once it's been laid out in the fabric, and then I iron it down. And I know that the applique is fully fused on if I lift up the iron, the piece of muslin is completely dry. As you can see on this side, the trim goes pretty far up, almost meeting the shoulder seam, but on this one it only goes as far as like the underarm area, just because that was how much trim I had left. But again, like this pretty much entire area is covered up by the mantle, so it doesn't really matter. And I did satin stitch around this area, so it's not like a frayed edge sort of hanging out there. It is like all finished. Finally, the 2 pieces that I did not sew, and I also do not have here, are his long sleeve shirt, as well as he has like a black turtleneck. The black turtleneck is a sleeveless black turtleneck that I'm using, that I originally used for my Libra Cosplay, and I figured I would use that because Libra has so many layers that eliminating like the sleeves of the black turtleneck that you never see like just makes more sense to me, because then I won't overheat as much in this costume. And the white shirt that I'm using is just like a typical white button down, because again, pretty much all the areas that would like make it look really distinctive, like the buttons down the front and the collar, are completely covered up once you have the rest of the costume on. So that is how I made my Libra costume. Sorry this tutorial was very quick. Hopefully the pictures that I insert will help explain a little bit better. I took a lot more video when I was doing Zelda, and now I'm going to do it when I'm working on Kanata. So hopefully the video I have in the for my future tutorials will help explain the story a little bit better. But thank you guys so much for watching anyway, and I'll see you all in the next video.